Happy Friday, everybody. Anyone have any questions before we start? We have looked at the early module feedback, by the way, so thank you all to everyone who submitted some early module feedback. The most common piece of feedback was, Bob, can you give more lectures? Can you teach more classes? We love your lectures. No, not really. The most common feedback was, put the slides up. Please put the slides up before the lecture begins. So we're trying to do that. Back in the old days, we used to just have a notebook and a pen and we'd take notes. Those days are gone. Any other things before we start today? Name?
Ashley.
Ashley.
I'd just like to ask, what's it a good idea to build a class within a class rather than extending another class?
It's when one class has too many responsibilities is the short answer. If you find that you have a class that has too many methods, it's getting too many methods and too much intelligence, you want to try to distribute that intelligence. By the way, he asked, when is a class too big? That was kind, and when should it be subdivided split up into other classes? So yeah, when the number of responsibilities gets too big. Now, what should the number of responsibilities be? That's very difficult to say. I don't have an actual number for that actually, but with some experience, you'll have some feeling about how big a class should be. You can look at the Java API and then count the number of methods inside a Java class in the Java API to get a feeling for how many responsibilities a typical object should have. But the more centralized the intelligence is, the more difficult it is to maintain and debug and extend and develop in the future. Yeah. Also, another good indicator is if you find yourself spending too much time scrolling. Like if it takes you a long time to scroll up and down a class, and you're spending a lot of time scrolling more than like a kind of a nuisance, that's an indicator too. So yeah, something like 5 to 10 responsibilities would be good. Another sign, while I'm thinking about it, another indicator of a class that's getting too big is the number of member variables in that class. If you find that the number of member variables is getting too long, that's a definite indicator, right? If it's more than 10, for example, you probably want to subdivide the class. Any other questions? That's a good question, by the way. That's a question from a developer who's really thinking about how to organize things. Question?
Do you have to use the code convention and debugging guidance in the lab in our tool?
Yes. So the question was, do we have to use the coding conventions and the comment conventions? Yes. So you'll be assessed on the quality of your code. So the coding conventions is about quality. And the quality of your Java documentation, right? Imagine you were going to buy a car, right? Buying a car is a huge investment. Imagine if the salesperson said, you're like, oh, can I just look at the engine just so I can see it? And the salesperson said, no way. No, you can't look at that. You'd probably not buy that car, right? So we're going to be looking at the quality, opening the hood of your car, looking at the quality to see how it is. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Another question?
So the test and entries flag are told in the lab today. Do we need to include them in the final project?
Those are debugging guidelines. The debugging guidelines, I don't think you're going to be assessed explicitly on the debugging guidelines, but they're there for your benefits if you introduce bugs or you're trying to track down bugs in your software. Then I highly recommend those techniques. They're also good for testing as well. I used to use them all the time. Any others? I see everybody is kind of awake today. Well, a lot of people. I wasn't expecting anybody to be awake today. Any other questions, concerns? Everybody's excited. So, just to make things even more exciting, we're going to try something new today. We have a pop quiz. So you're all going to take a pop quiz right now, and it's going to shock you. So the pop quiz is located, as you can imagine, on Moodle. Some of you may have seen this already. Identifying objects. So there it is. Given the partial specification below, identify a list of candidate objects. This exercise is to be done in groups. So right now you have 15 minutes to download this exercise and identify a candidate list of objects from this. This may or may not be good test preparation. If you have questions, you can let me know, by the way. Yeah. The groups could be two or more. You know, it doesn't matter what the group size is. So 15 minutes, maybe not 15, but at the most 15 minutes, the most. Does everybody understand what the exercise is? The instructions are very short, right? So there's a 2 or 3 paragraph drawing editor partial specifications, and you read those specifications and identify the candidate objects. can see everybody's amazing screens. There's one thing I'm a bit surprised about though. There was a special slide. I didn't see anybody consulting the very special slide. It's called Guidelines for Identifying Objects. Does anybody remember that slide? I would have expected some people to be looking at that slide for this exercise. So a little hint. Does anybody remember that one? Name?
Sure.
Sure.
It's just call me. It's fine. Sure. Yeah, call me sure.
Did you have a question?
No, I
Do
remember.
you remember those slides? Do you remember which lecture they were in?
I'm not too sure, but I got them pretty sure. Like the class is quite important now and all that stuff.
They're in the lecture called Objects. There's a lecture called Objects, the first one. And then there's a slide called the Guidelines for Identifying Objects. So those are the way to do it. So I didn't see anybody looking at that magic slide. It's hard to identify which slides are the magic ones and which ones are not so magic. So it's this one. There it is.
Wait, yeah.
Does anybody find this exercise fun? This is unusual stuff, by the way. This is not something taught very much. 3 more minutes. I've never used one of these things before, so hopefully it's gonna work. It looks kind of low quality. Is that one better? That one's a little better, isn't it? That's funny. That looks the easiest to see, right? Okay, should we give it a try? Should we give this exercise a try? How would Bob do this? Is anybody wondering about how Bob would do that? Can everybody see this thing? I've never used one, but I hope everybody can see that. It's not very good quality, is it? Is it a little bit blurry? I'm not sure. But let's give it a try. So we know that objects correspond to nouns, right? Everybody knows that, like in their sleep. So I'm going to go through this. Who knows what a noun is? Anybody remember what a noun is from their primary school classes? Name? Oliver. Things. Yep, that's right. Person, place, or thing is the definition I learned in school. Anybody else learn that definition? Person, place, or thing. So I'm going to highlight the nouns. So the first noun I see is drawing editor. The next one I see is graphics editor. Then I see users. Then I see drawings, lines, rectangles, ellipses, text. Then I see tools, control the mode of operation. Okay, that there is some funky stuff too, like is mode of operation a noun? Probably it is, but it's a weird noun. So we have tool. Okay, there is time, but the way that noun is being used, well, let's highlight it. If I strictly just highlight the nouns at this point, then it still counts as a noun. Two kinds of tools again. There's a selection tool. There's a creation tool. Selection tool is mentioned again. Drawing elements, I think we already saw that. Cursor, one or more drawing elements. Drawing elements. A single element. There's a tricky sentence in there. They can be manipulated. That, anybody know what that's called? That's a tricky, anybody good at grammar in here? English grammar? That's a passive voice sentence. That's what's called a passive sentence, passive voice sentence. They, but that, strictly speaking, that is a noun. Elements have been selected in this way are referred to as the current selection. The current selection is indicated visually by displaying the control points of the elements. Clicking on dragging the control point modifies the element with which the control point is associated. When a creation tool is active, the current selection, there it is again, current selection is empty. The cursor changes in different ways according to the specific creation tool. And the user can create elements of the selected kind. After the element is created, the selection tool is made active and the newly created element becomes the current selection. So that's step one, is to go through and highlight the nouns. Any questions so far? And then we start looking at which one of these makes good candidate classes, keeping our guidelines in mind. I'm left-handed, so that makes it a disadvantage, I think, in this exercise. So drawing editor, that looks like a good candidate classes. That looks like a good one. Drawing editor. That looks like our main application, right? The class that is the main, has the main method. Graphics editor. So I'm not going to write down graphics editor because I'm going to apply guideline number 6, which is the redundancy guideline, right? I'm going to fuse those two together. Users, okay, I'm not going to write down users. I'm going to write down user because I'm applying the guideline on use singular nouns by default. But that users implies that we're going to need a user manager, for example. I'll put this here, user manager. Okay, then we have again that the drawing, and it's got an S, but we don't use drawings, right, as multiplicity. The drawings, that implies that we might need something like a drawing. Oops, I'm spelling wrong. That's good. Drawing collection. Am I writing off the screen? Yes, I am. This is drawing collection. Okay, I know where the edge is. Let's see. Oh, so it doesn't really fit, does it? Doesn't really fit very well. I'll try to limit the how far I write off the side there. Where does it? Okay, I'll make a little line on my piece of paper, not to go past here. So drawing collection, lines, line, rectangle, ellipse, text. Text is a little bit tricky, right? Because I think it's both singular and plural. Okay, then there's tool, right? And then there's the editor again. I'm not going to rewrite the editor tool again. Time. I guess we can write it down. We'll write down time. I'm not sure that's going to be useful in this case, but we can write it down as part of the exercise. Tool appears again. Then there's selection tool. Drawing element, right? Drawing element. Drawing elements again. So that kind of implies that we might need some sort of a drawing element manager or drawing element collection. Now they can be manipulated. Anybody want to guess what that object corresponds to? They can be manipulated. That's a funny sentence, and there are often funny sentences in natural language. Name? Emily, right?
The drawing elements.
Yes, that's right. There are kind of two objects being implied there: the drawing elements and the user. Like the user has to be doing that. So there's element again, drawing the single element elements, current selection, control points, control points, creation tool. Do we already have that one? So we have selection tool, but we don't have creation tool yet. Okay, creation tool. Current selection we already have. Cursor. Now, this is, I'm going to put that one in brackets. Anybody know why? Am I running out of space? Anybody want to guess? There is already a Java cursor class, pretty sure, so. Creation tool again, user again, element again. Do I have elements? Drawing element I have. Selected kind, selected element, current selection. I'm gonna map that to current selection. Selection tool, do I have selection tool? Yes, already. Element, drawing is drawing element. And current selection again. So that's my list of candidate objects. Anybody have anything similar? And I will just go one step further. It's not part of the exercise. But I can look at these and start to make connections between them already. So like somehow you can imagine these two objects, these three are all going to be connected, aren't they? The drawing editor, drawing, and drawing collection. These all have something in common, don't they? You can almost imagine a hierarchy right there already. And these, selection tool, creation tool, you can sort of see that those three are connected to each other already. And you can see, like, drawing element, by the way, all these drawing ones are connected to each other, right? Control points, that now it's starting to get messy. But we can see that some of those objects are probably going to be collaborating or related, closely related somehow, right? And I've drawn like an implicit hierarchy there. But that's like the next step. That's not actually part of the exercise. The exercise is just a list of candidate objects. Did everybody find that exciting? I know you did. Good. Any questions about that? That something like that may or may not be on the test. Is Shesky? Is
I
that?
have a few questions. First one, is the user class relevant at all? Because if we think about it as a graphic editor, and for example in Paint, like we don't actually use the user, so I think it's just irrelevant in this case. And also if we put the cursor class in the brackets, I think we should also do line, rectangle, ellipse, and text.
Yes.
Those exist in Java.
Those are good points. Is the user class really relevant? That's the question. Anybody know the answer to that? Is the user class relevant? I would want you in my group if I was doing this. The answer is you'd have to ask the client who's asking for the software. You'd have to talk to the, because this is a partial requirement specification, right? You just have to go talk to the customer and ask, like, do you really want to have a system with different users and so on? And then the second question, about the lines. Yes, I would have to look, I would want to look at the Java API and see, is there already a line text class and all that stuff? And then maybe put a little star next to them or some annotation like Java or something. Yes, so good questions. Any other questions about that exercise? Okay, good. I hope everybody found that educational. It's very unusual, that exercise. It won't be done in most software engineering classes. Let's see if I can get this thing working again. I'm wondering if this is going to pick up that. I don't know if the quality of this is going to be good enough. But we'll see. I was trying to pick up the projector with that because I didn't figure out how to record it. I was thinking about trying to record it like directly, but yeah, anyways, we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so let's do something different. A quick and concise introduction to Maven and Gradle. So we're going to have a quick introduction to this tool. This, in my opinion, this falls into a little bit the topic of administration and configuration management. When you start a new job, you'll be told this is the IDE you have to use. This is the programming language you have to use. You might even be told what operating system you have to use, maybe. Question?
Is it right if you scan the sheet that you wrote on and put it on Moodle?
If the quality of the recording is too low, I will scan the sheet, yes,
Awesome.
yes, thank you, yeah, yes. I'm anticipating a low quality recording that's illegible. So we're going to talk about this build, so-called build manager called Maven. Did anybody notice this? This is used in conjunction with Java FX when you start a new Java FX project in IntelliJ. Did anybody notice that? And these other topics associated with Maven. So it's a so-called build tool. So you might have noticed that when you compile your software, you have to compile a whole bunch of different classes, and some classes may depend on others, and some you might be importing different libraries, for example the Java FX library, so that's called a dependency. And you also want to create a jar file, for example, when you actually release the product, right? Theoretically, you're working on a product that gets released and then sold, and then you become millionaires at the end. That all occurs in a so-called build cycle. And Maven is a build cycle tool, right? So that's the idea behind Maven, right? And you create something called you share your project on a repository and so on. And all of this is managed with Maven, this kind of cycle. And this is what it looks like when in illustration, a so-called build lifecycle, a validate phase, a compile phase, a test phase, right? Like your JUnit tests, for example, a packaging phase, installation phase, and deploy phase. That's a typical build cycle, and Maven is a tool that lets you manage that cycle or those different stages. Each lifecycle phase includes the ones above it. So when you execute test, for example, it does a validation first, then a compile, and then runs the tests, all your JUnit tests. You can add and customize your build cycle, right? But with plugins, and you have a so-called default life cycle. There's also a clean operation where you erase everything. That's going to be one of your favorites, by the way, erasing everything and compiling from scratch. And it's lots of options. This is a complicated, or it can be a complicated tool, actually. It doesn't have to be, but it can be very complicated. To help you guys get started with this, I made a little screen capture demo how to set up a new project in Maven, a new Maven project in IntelliJ rather. So if you have questions about how to get started doing that, they're all answered here. I spent 20 years on that 10-second screen demo. No, not that long. But you know, this screen capture demos, they usually, what you're not seeing is all the times I tried and failed before I got the one working. Obviously, you can find other things on YouTube related to this, and I've watched some of them myself. It creates something called a project object model file, which is an XML file that contains all of your build information and your build configuration in it. So it has something like a project ID, it contains a list of dependencies, it contains a list of the plugins that you're using in your project, and lots of other settings. We could actually talk about this for a long time, but we won't because you'd all die from boredom. This is what an example POM file looks like. Did anybody create a new Java FX project yet in IntelliJ? Did anybody try that yet? Okay, when you do, if you do, then you'll notice it creates a Maven project as well, and then you'll notice inside there's a POM file. And that's what it looks like. It's an XML, right? It has some version information in it, right? All XML files have to start with a certain set of tags, right? It has a version. It has that group ID that you always enter when you build a new project, make a new project. It has an artifact ID, how it's going to be deployed, more version control information, and then there are dependencies. Like this is saying we're going to use the JUnit library in our project for the testing part of the build cycle. That's what that's saying basically. So what happens when you set up a Maven project? You can see it in the screen capture demo. By the way, you can see it all happening on the screen. It basically sets up your configuration, and it puts all of the files in the right places, in the right directory structures, and so on. So there's a pom.xml file that we just made note of, and then there's a source directory with all your source code in it, right? It has your Java files, resources, maybe some web applications. It has tests, test files, And then there are the so-called target directory, which is your compiled objects and classes, jar files, and so on. You can use Maven from the command line. You don't have to, I don't think, in this project, but you can, right? Because before all of these tools had GUIs, they all were run from the command line, right? Like Git was run from the command line before somebody created a GUI for it, and GitLab was run from the command line before somebody added a GUI to it. Same with Maven. So all of these tools have some historic, features, let's say. And the running things from the command line can be very helpful when you're doing remote work on a machine that's not your own. Right here are some of the Maven commands. You won't have to memorize any of those, but you can see that they resemble somewhat that build cycle that we were talking about. Maven actually has a reporting system and a kind of code analysis features that look very, very interesting. So there's a sub-program, or let's say a feature in Maven that looks for mistakes in your code, actually, a source code analyzer for finding common flaws, right, which is quite interesting. There's another one about testing, like the percentage of the branches and lines accessed by the unit tests. Like, there's always this constant question: do your tests actually test every possible outcome or every possible input and output? Right? That's called coverage. Every possible combination of input and output. And that's a huge mystery, really, to try to figure out, am I really testing every possible scenario? That's a separate module. Is there a module like that here at University of Nottingham, just on testing? Has anybody noticed anything like that? At some universities, you can take a module only on testing to try to get complete coverage of tests. It's a huge topic. Does anybody know the theoretically correct answer for what kind of input the software should be able to handle? Does anybody know the theoretically correct answer for that? It's something that I think every computer scientist should know, like in their sleep. I don't know if it's taught, how much it's taught though. Anybody know the answer to that question? What kind of input should any piece of software be able to handle? That's the question. It would be a good test question. Emily?
An incorrect value or an out of bounds value.
Yes, incorrect values, and what else?
Out of bounds.
Out of bounds values, yes. Any other? There's a shorter, more complete name?
Beatrice.
Okay, are you right? Beatrix, what do you say?
Able to handle any input.
Any input, that's the answer, yes. Any random input. A piece of software, any piece of software in the entire universe should be able to handle random inputs without crashing. That's the correct answer. And that's you can tell if somebody's a computer scientist with that one question. If they can answer that one question, they're a computer scientist, if they can answer it correctly, right? And that's how you can tell that the employees at Microsoft are not computer scientists. Right? Because if you call Microsoft tech support with a problem, they'll say, "What did you do wrong?" Okay, anyways, I'm going off a little bit on a tangent there. Okay, there are other reporting options, very advanced options, right? This is a funny one, looking at the complexity of your code. Non-commenting source statements show a method complexity roughly equivalent to counting the number of semicolons and open brackets in a source file. So lots of different features there. We won't be getting deeply into the features. Name?
Dash.
Dash.
What is the PMD doing that your IDE isn't? So it's reporting on errors, right? Your IDE already tells you if you're doing a syntax error or something.
Yes, that will tell you, that will go into a little bit more depth. For example, you have an if statement without a final else or something like that. It will look at the programming logic in a little bit more depth. The IDE is very focused on syntax, like are you missing a semicolon, or did you spell a word wrong, or are you trying to call a method that's not existing? And so it's very focused on, like, let's say the letter level and the character level. You could call it like the highest level of granularity, the individual characters. But if you take a step back, you have sentences or lines of code or programming logic. So it takes one step back and looks at that logic. But it would be a good lab exercise to use these. We won't do all of that, but it would be a fun lab exercise to actually generate, here's a piece of code like the breakout program, and run all these reports on the breakout program to see what happens. I don't know what the answer is, by the way. Okay, we have to wrap up very soon. So one of the things that Maven does is manage dependencies, right? That's when you use other libraries, like the JUnit library is one example. The JavaFX library is another example. Whenever you're using some external library, Maven manages those dependencies. And you can look in the POM file. So this is how you would add a dependency to a POM file. And you'll see an example of this in the screen capture demo that I made. And there's like a million different options for including plugins and dependencies. There's lots of advanced options there. Okay, and this could be like multiple lectures. We could do like multiple lectures. We could do a coursework on Maven and so on, but we're not going to go into that much detail. And there are lots of topics we didn't talk about, like transitive dependencies. So when one dependency depends on another, and you have to look out for circular dependencies too. You don't want a circular dependency. And so on. We didn't cover multiple projects, but you can find obviously YouTube videos on that. And we didn't talk much about plugins and so on. This is just something to help you get started with that tool. We never go into great depth on these tools. And it's because, well, one of the reasons is because when you start a new job, you don't get to choose your tools, generally speaking. Generally speaking, there could be some exceptions, but they will tell you which IDE that the company uses. They will tell you which programming language they want to see, because it depends on the customers. And some companies will tell you what operating system you have to use. That's not nice, actually. I've never worked at one of those companies, but I know that they're out there. They say you must use this, and it's usually, unfortunately, not the best operating system. Okay, there's some more information there. And I've put a description in the screen capture demo. By the way, when I create screen capture demos, sometimes I add detailed descriptions, not all the time, but in the Git one, for example, there's a very detailed step-by-step description in there. I don't know if anybody noticed that. There's another build tool, by the way, we're going to stop, called Gradle, and I'll let you guys look at that in your own time so we don't go over time today. Any questions? Is everybody looking forward to the weekend? Nate?
Which one do you suggest us to use? Maven or Gradle?
I think Maven's probably easier, a little bit more user-friendly. Yes, that's what I would recommend. And if you look carefully at I made a screen capture demo, by the way, of setting up a Gradle project in IntelliJ. If you look carefully, I have to change the Java version. I can't use the latest JDK version. I have to go back a few versions to get it to work. So there's something going on there. Yeah. Anyways, I would probably choose Maven personally, just, yeah, for now. Any other questions? Have a good weekend, everyone. Oh, it even says it. Pay attention to the JDK Java version used.